Would you trust your own eyes if you saw your name carved into a century-old headstone you're standing beside? 7 documented cases at Appalachian Graveyard ridges where visitors found impossible connections to graves that predate their birth. Experienced rangers flat out refuse patrol duty after sunset in certain burial grounds. Hikers recorded whispers speaking in dialects extinct for generations. Investigators recovered cameras showing figures that moved without casting shadows. The survivors bear scars forming symbols that match engravings on forgotten tombstones. What lies beneath those ridgetop graveyards has been waiting for very specific visitors. I still remember the weight of the air that night, thick, damp, clinging to my skin like something alive. It was the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays there. I was 23, working as a surveyor's assistant for a small land development company out of Boone, North Carolina. The job was supposed to be routine, mark boundary lines, take measurements, nothing complicated. But when they sent me up to Graveyard Ridge in the Appalachian backcountry, I had no idea I was walking into something that would change me forever. Graveyard Ridge got its name for a reason. Scattered across those hills were dozens of forgotten family plots, some dating back to the 1700s, overgrown with kudzu and buried under layers of rotting leaves. Most weren't marked on any modern map. The locals didn't talk about them much, and when they did, their voices dropped to whispers. I should have paid attention to that. I should have listened when Old Man Barker at the general store told me to stay off that ridge after dark. But I didn't. I thought he was just another superstitious mountain man spinning tales to scare outsiders. I was wrong. The job started on a Wednesday morning in late October. My supervisor, a heavyset man named Gary, dropped me off at the trailhead with a GPS unit, survey equipment, and a walkie-talkie. He'd pick me up at the same spot by 4 p.m. Simple enough. The first few hours went smoothly. I hiked through dense forest, the autumn leaves crunching under my boots, marking trees and taking notes. Around noon, I stumbled onto the first graveyard. It was small, maybe 8 or 9 headstones, most of them cracked and leaning at odd angles. The inscriptions were worn smooth by time, but I could make out a few names. Eliza Harmon, 1843, 1861. Baby May, born and died, March 1879. A rusty iron fence surrounded the plot. Sections of it collapsed inward like broken ribs. I took a few photos for the report and kept moving. That's when the feeling started. You know the one, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck, like someone's watching you. I stopped and turned around, scanning the trees. Nothing, just shadows and birdsong. I shook it off and pressed deeper into the woods. By 2 o'clock, I'd found 3 more graveyards. Each one was in worse condition than the last. Headstones toppled, stone vaults crumbling, the ground sunken in places where caskets had collapsed beneath the earth. The third site had something that made my stomach turn. Tiny graves. 5 of them in a row, each no bigger than a shoebox. Infant deaths weren't uncommon back then, but seeing them all together like that, it felt wrong. Heavy. I checked my watch. Still had time before Gary showed up. I decided to push a little further north to finish the section. That's when I saw it. A graveyard unlike any of the others. It sat in a clearing at the top of a steep incline, surrounded by dead trees, not autumn bare, but genuinely dead, their branches twisted and black like charred skeletons. The air felt different there. Stiller. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just silence pressing in from all sides. The graves were arranged in a perfect circle around a large stone marker in the center. I'd never seen anything like it. I approached slowly, my boots squelching in mud that shouldn't have been there. It hadn't rained in days. The center marker was enormous, at least 7 feet tall, carved from dark gray stone. There were symbols etched into its surface, not letters, not anything I recognized. They looked almost like scratches, deep grooves that spiraled around the stone in chaotic patterns. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. That's when I heard it, a whisper. Soft, barely audible, like wind through grass. But there was no wind. I froze, listening. It came again, clearer this time. Not words exactly, but sounds that almost formed words, rising and falling in a rhythm that made my skin crawl. It seemed to be coming from beneath my feet. I stepped back from the center stone. The whispering stopped. I stood there for a long moment, heart pounding, telling myself it was just my imagination, just the stress of being alone in the woods all day. Then I looked down at the graves surrounding the stone. Every single headstone faced inward toward the center marker. Not outward like normal graves. Inward. That's when I should have left. That's when every instinct in my body screamed at me to get the hell off that ridge. But I didn't. Curiosity, or maybe something worse, kept me rooted there. I walked around the circle, reading what I could of the inscriptions. Most were too weathered, but a few stood out. Thomas Calder, 1892. Sarah Lockwood, 1889. James and Annabelle Quinn, 1894. All of them died within a few years of each other. I noticed something else. None of them had birth dates, just death dates. And carved beneath each name was the same phrase. The offering was made. My hands were shaking as I photographed the last headstone. The light was starting to fade. I checked my watch. 3:47 p.m. I needed to get back to the trailhead. Fast. I turned to leave and stopped dead. There was someone standing at the edge of the clearing. A figure tall and impossibly thin, dressed in what looked like old, ragged clothes. It stood perfectly still, partially hidden behind one of the dead trees. I couldn't make out a face, just a dark shape watching me. "Hello?" My voice came out weak, strangled. The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, silent. I took a step backward, toward the circle of graves. The figure tilted its head slowly to one side, like a curious dog. That movement, so unnatural, so wrong, sent pure terror flooding through me. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my equipment bag slamming against my back. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the trees. Not footsteps exactly, but a rustling, crackling sound, like dry leaves being crushed. It was fast. Too fast. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, lungs burning, legs pumping, following the direction I thought was downhill. The forest seemed darker than it should have been, the shadows deeper, pressing in from all sides. I could still hear that sound behind me, keeping pace, never getting closer but never falling behind either. Then I heard the whispering again, not from behind me, from everywhere. All around me, rising from the ground, seeping from the trees. A chorus of voices, all speaking at once in that same incomprehensible language. I broke through a thicket and nearly fell down a steep embankment. I caught myself on a tree, gasping, and finally looked back. Nothing. The forest was empty, silent, but the feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger now, like a physical pressure against my chest. I pulled out my walkie-talkie with trembling hands. "Gary? Gary, you there?" Static. Then his voice, distant and distorted. "Where the hell are you? I'm at the pickup point." I'm on my way. Something's wrong up here, Gary. We need to..." The radio cut out. Dead air. I looked at the screen. No signal. That was impossible. These walkie-talkies had a 10-mile range. I was maybe 2 miles from the trailhead. I started moving again, faster now, following what I hoped was the right direction. The forest felt like a maze. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. I'd been hiking these woods for hours and knew the terrain, but now everything felt foreign, wrong. Then I saw lights ahead. Flashlights. Relief flooded through me. "Gary!" I shouted, stumbling toward the lights. "Gary, I'm here!" The lights didn't move. As I got closer, I realized they weren't flashlights at all. They were lanterns, old-fashioned oil lanterns, hanging from tree branches in a rough line, leading deeper into the woods, away from the trailhead. I stopped, breathing hard. The lanterns swayed gently despite the complete absence of wind. In their flickering light, I could see something hanging from one of the trees beyond them. Something that looked like cloth. No, not cloth. It was a person, hanging from a rope. I staggered backward, a scream caught in my throat. The figure was too far away to see clearly, but I could make out the shape, suspended there, perfectly still, its face hidden in shadow. Then it moved. Just a twitch, a slight jerking motion, like someone testing a noose. The rope creaked, and then, slowly, the figure began to turn toward me. I didn't wait to see its face. I bolted in the opposite direction, crashing blindly through the darkness. Behind me, I heard a sound that still haunts my nightmares. Laughter. Low, rattling, inhuman laughter that seemed to echo from multiple directions at once. I don't know how long I ran. Time felt broken, stretched out and compressed simultaneously. But eventually, I burst through the tree line onto the access road. Gary's truck was there, headlights cutting through the dusk. He jumped out when he saw me. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you?" I couldn't speak. I just stood there, gasping, covered in scratches and mud, my equipment bag long since lost in the woods. Gary grabbed my shoulders. Hey, look at me. What the hell happened up there?" I told him everything, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. The graveyard, the figure, the lanterns, the hanging body. He listened, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You went up to the circle, didn't you? The one with the stone in the middle?" I nodded. Gary's face went pale. He looked past me, toward the darkening woods, then back at me. "Get in the truck, now." We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. Finally, I found my voice. "You know about that place?" "Yeah." His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Everyone around here knows about it. We just don't talk about it." "What is it?" Gary was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, back in the 1890s, there was a cult up in these mountains, called themselves the Circle of the Deep. They believed you could communicate with the dead, control them even, if you made the right kind of sacrifices. That graveyard, that's where they did their rituals. Story goes they'd lure people up there, kill them, and bury them in that circle to bind their spirits. The center stone was supposed to be some kind of anchor, keeping all those souls trapped there. I felt sick. What happened to the cult? Nobody knows for sure. One winter, a group of locals went up there to put a stop to it, found the place deserted, but there were fresh graves in the circle. 11 of them. They figured the cult turned on itself, killed each other in some kind of final ritual. After that, people started disappearing on that ridge. Hikers, hunters, surveyors. Some came back wrong, couldn't speak right, didn't recognize their own families. Most never came back at all. "Why didn't you tell me this before you sent me up there?" Gary's jaw tightened. "Because I didn't think you'd actually find it. That graveyard, it's not supposed to be there anymore. Forest Service claimed they destroyed it back in the 60s, filled in the graves, smashed the stone. But I guess..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I guess some things don't stay buried. That was 6 months ago. I quit the surveying job the next day, left North Carolina, tried to put it all behind me, but I can't. Because 3 weeks after that night, I woke up with mud under my fingernails. Fresh mud, and scratched into the condensation on my bedroom mirror were symbols. The same spiraling patterns I'd seen on the center stone. I'm in California now, 2,000 miles from Graveyard Ridge. But every night, just before I fall asleep, I hear it. That whispering, rising from somewhere deep and dark and far away. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see those lanterns swaying in the trees, leading me back to a place I never should have found, a place that won't let me go. You know that feeling when you're somewhere you shouldn't be, and every instinct in your body is screaming at you to leave? That's how I felt the first time I stood at the edge of Graveyard Ridge. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. I didn't listen. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I found up there in those ancient Appalachian Mountains, in a place locals won't even mention after dark. And if you're smart, you'll never go looking for it yourself. It started 3 years ago, when I moved to a small town in eastern Kentucky to study Appalachian folklore for my graduate thesis. The locals were friendly enough during the day, But there was always this underlying tension, like everyone was keeping a secret they'd agreed never to share. I'd ask about old burial sites and abandoned cemeteries, and people would suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. But there was one man, Earl, who worked at the gas station on Route 23. He was probably in his 70s, with hands like weathered leather and eyes that had seen things he'd never fully talk about. One evening, as I was paying for coffee, he noticed the folklore books in my passenger seat. He leaned in close, so close I could smell tobacco and something earthier, and he whispered, "You asking about Graveyard Ridge?" I nodded, trying to hide my excitement. Finally, someone willing to talk. Earl looked around the empty station like someone might be listening, then wrote an address on the back of my receipt. "You want real stories? Go see Ida May. She's the last one who'll talk about it. But don't you dare go up there yourself, you hear me?" The way he said it, with genuine fear in his voice, should have been my first warning. But I was young and stupid and thought I was invincible behind my academic curiosity. So I went to see Ida May the next morning. She lived in a trailer at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by wind chimes made from old bones and glass. When I knocked, she opened the door like she'd been expecting me. "Earl called," she said simply. "Come in, but you won't like what you hear." Ida May told me about Graveyard Ridge, a remote cemetery high in the mountains that dated back to the 1700s. It wasn't on any maps. The trail to it had been deliberately overgrown decades ago. "There are some places," she said, rocking in her chair, "where the dead don't rest proper, where the veil between worlds got torn and things that shouldn't be can walk through." She explained that Graveyard Ridge had been used for more than just regular burials. During the witch trials of the early 1800s, people accused of dark practices were executed and buried there, away from consecrated ground. Their graves were unmarked, their names forgotten, their spirits trapped between worlds. "They say if you go up there at night, you'll hear them calling, and if you answer—" She paused, looking directly into my eyes. "You become one of them." I thanked her for the stories and left, my recorder full of what I thought was perfect thesis material. But Ida May grabbed my arm as I reached the door. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You're thinking about going up there, aren't you?" She didn't wait for my answer. 3 people went missing on that ridge in the last 50 years. Their bodies were never found. But sometimes, on quiet nights, people say they can hear them screaming from the mountain. I should have listened. God, I should have listened. But 2 weeks later, I found myself hiking up an old logging road that supposedly led near the ridge. It was late October, and the leaves had turned that deep blood red that only happens in Appalachia. The sun was setting, and I told myself I'd just find the location, mark it on my GPS, and come back during daylight. The forest grew denser as I climbed, the trees pressing in like they were trying to block my path. My phone lost signal about a mile in, and my GPS stopped working entirely shortly after that. The compass on my watch started spinning randomly, which should have been impossible. But I kept going, drawn forward by something I couldn't explain, like there was a string tied around my chest pulling me deeper into those woods. I found the cemetery just as the last light was dying. It wasn't what I expected. The graves were scattered across a small clearing on the ridge, most of them unmarked or with stones so weathered you couldn't read them. But what made my blood run cold was the silence. In all my time in the mountains, I'd never experienced silence like that. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees, just absolute suffocating quiet. The temperature dropped suddenly and I could see my breath misting in the air. That's when I noticed the circle. In the center of the cemetery, someone had arranged stones in a perfect circle, and inside it were symbols carved into the dirt. Symbols I recognized from my research on Appalachian folk magic and witch marks. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. Through the viewfinder, I could see something that wasn't visible to my naked eye. In the center of that circle, there was a shadow, darker than the gathering night, and it was moving, twisting, taking shape. That's when I heard the first voice. It came from behind me, near the tree line, a woman's voice, soft and sad. "Help me," she whispered. Please help me find my way home." I spun around and there was nothing there, just trees and darkness. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. The silence swallowed my voice like it had never existed. Then I heard another voice, and another. They came from all around me now, dozens of voices, all of them pleading, crying, begging. "Help us. We're lost. We can't find our way. So cold, so dark." The voices overlapped and echoed, and I realized with mounting horror that they were coming from the graves. I started backing away, trying to find the trail I'd come up on, but everything looked different in the darkness. The trees seemed to have moved, closing off the path. My flashlight flickered and died, even though I'd just put fresh batteries in that morning. That's when I saw them. Figures standing among the graves, translucent and wrong, their forms flickering like old film. Some were dressed in clothing from centuries past, others in more modern clothes. They weren't looking at me. They were all facing the center of the cemetery, toward that circle of stones, like they were waiting for something. The shadow in the center had grown. It was taller than any human now, and it had a shape that hurt to look at, like it existed in too many dimensions at once. And it was opening. That's the only way I can describe it. The shadow was opening like a mouth or a doorway, and something on the other side was pushing through. I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run, but suddenly I was crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, dozens of them, and those voices had changed. They weren't pleading anymore. They were angry. "You called to us," they hissed. "You answered. You're ours now." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and I found myself at the edge of a cliff I didn't remember passing. The moon had risen, and in its light, I could see I was still in the cemetery. I'd been running in circles. The gravestones surrounded me, and the figures were closer now, forming a ring around me, just like that circle of stones. One of them stepped forward. She might have been beautiful once, but death had twisted her into something else. Her eyes were hollow pits, and when she opened her mouth, there were too many teeth. "You're the first to come in so long," she said, and her voice was like wind through a crypt. "We've been so hungry, so alone. The others wouldn't answer our calls, but you did." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figures were closing in, their cold radiating out in waves. I could feel it seeping into my bones, making my movements slow and sluggish. The shadow in the center was fully formed now, and it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a doorway made of darkness and despair, and I could see things moving on the other side, things that should never exist in our world. That's when I remembered what Ida May had told me, a detail I'd dismissed as superstitious nonsense. "If you're ever trapped up there," she'd said, "the only way out is to give them something in return. A name, a memory, a piece of yourself you can never get back." I don't remember what I gave them. That's the honest truth. There's a hole in my mind now, a blank space where something important used to be. Sometimes I'll be in the middle of doing something and realize I've lost time, or I'll hear someone call my name and turn around to find no one there. Part of me is still on that ridge, and part of something else came back with me. I woke up 3 days later in my car, parked at that gas station where I'd first met Earl. My camera was gone, my recorder was gone, all my research notes were gone, but I had dirt under my fingernails, scratches all over my arms, and a thin layer of dust on my clothes that smelled like old graves. Earl found me there at dawn. He took one look at me and went pale. "You went up there," he said. "It wasn't a question. I can see it on you. That ridge has its claws in you now." He was right. That was 3 years ago, and I've never been the same. I left that town the same day, abandoned my thesis, and moved as far from Appalachia as I could get. But it doesn't matter. Every night, just as I'm falling asleep, I hear them. Those voices from the graves. They're calling me back, begging me to return, reminding me that I'm not finished with them yet. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up until dawn every single night, I want to go back. There's something up on Graveyard Ridge that belongs to me now, or maybe I belong to it. The pull gets stronger every year, like that string around my chest is being slowly wound tighter, drawing me back to those mountains. Last week I found dirt in my bed when I woke up. The same dirt from the cemetery, with that same grave smell. I haven't been anywhere near Appalachia. I haven't left my apartment in days, but somehow that place is reaching out to me across hundreds of miles, reminding me that I made a deal I don't remember making. Ida Mae died 2 months ago. I saw her obituary online. The article mentioned she'd been found in her trailer, peaceful in her sleep. But there was one detail that made me sick to my stomach. They found symbols carved into her floor, protective symbols, and her wind chimes had all been torn down, the bones scattered everywhere. She'd been protecting herself from something, and in the end, it wasn't enough. Earl stopped answering his phone. I've called the gas station dozens of times, but whoever picks up says he doesn't work there anymore, hasn't for years, even though I talked to him 3 years ago. When I pressed for details, the line went dead, and when I called back, the number was disconnected. So, here I am, telling you this story as a warning. If you're ever in Appalachia and someone mentions Graveyard Ridge, do not go looking for it. Do not answer if you hear voices in the dark. Do not make deals with things that shouldn't exist. Because once that place has you, it never really lets you go. I'm writing this from a motel room somewhere in Kentucky. I don't remember deciding to drive here. I don't remember packing my bags or getting in my car. But 3 days ago, I blinked, and suddenly I was on Route 23, headed east, following a pull I can't resist anymore. Tomorrow, I think I'll go back up to that ridge. I don't want to. Every rational part of my mind is screaming at me to turn around, to run, to do anything but go back there. But I don't think I have a choice anymore. Whatever I gave them that night, whatever piece of myself I traded for my freedom, it wasn't enough. They want the rest of me now. If you're reading this, it means I never came back. It means I'm up there on Graveyard Ridge now, standing among the graves, adding my voice to all the others calling out in the darkness, waiting for the next person who's foolish enough to answer. And the thing that terrifies me most? Part of me is glad. Part of me wants to go home to that terrible place, because that's what Graveyard Ridge has become. It's not just in my head anymore. It's in my bones, in my blood, in every breath I take. That cemetery has claimed me, body and soul, and tomorrow night, I'll finally stop fighting it. Do not come looking for me. Do not try to find Graveyard Ridge. Some places are better left forgotten, some stories better left untold. But I'm telling you anyway because maybe my warning will save someone else from making the same mistake I did. The voices are calling me now. I can hear them through the motel walls, soft and insistent. Come home, they whisper. We're waiting for you. We've always been waiting. And God help me, I'm listening. I'm packing my bag. I'm getting ready to answer. This is my last message from the world of the living. After tonight, I'll be something else. Something that stands among the graves on Graveyard Ridge, waiting in the darkness for the next person who's curious enough, foolish enough, or unlucky enough to hear our voices. Remember my warning. Remember this story. And if you ever find yourself on a lonely mountain road in Appalachia, and you hear voices calling your name from the darkness, whatever you do not answer. Because once you do, you're already one of us. The old folks in these mountains always said never go near Graveyard Ridge after dark. I wish I'd listened. My name's Ethan, and I grew up in eastern Kentucky, deep in the Appalachian hollows where the trees grow so thick you can't see the sky. Graveyard Ridge isn't its real name, at least not on any map. That's just what everyone called it. A stretch of densely wooded hillside about 3 miles from my hometown, dotted with forgotten family plots and crumbling headstones dating back to the 1800s. Some graves were marked, most weren't. I was 22 when this happened, home for the summer after my sophomore year of college. My buddy Cole and I had grown up exploring these woods, and we thought we knew every inch of them. We'd heard the stories, sure, everyone had. Tales of lights moving between the trees at night, voices calling out names, people who went up there and came back, different, changed somehow. We didn't believe any of it. That was our first mistake. It was late August, one of those sweltering nights where the humidity clings to your skin like a wet blanket. Cole had been drinking, talking big about how we should go up to Graveyard Ridge and prove once and for all that it was just superstitious nonsense. I should have said no, should have told him to sleep it off. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and followed him out the door. We parked Cole's truck at the old logging road around midnight and started hiking. The trail was overgrown, barely visible in the beam of our flashlights. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, that relentless summer sound that fills your head until you can't think straight. But as we climbed higher, something strange happened. They stopped. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch. The forest went completely silent. "You noticed that?" Cole whispered, his earlier bravado fading. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. The silence was wrong, unnatural. Even the wind had died, leaving the air perfectly still. Our footsteps on the dried leaves sounded impossibly loud. We'd been walking maybe 20 minutes when we found the first grave. It was set back from the trail, almost hidden by overgrown rhododendron. The headstone was weathered limestone, the inscription barely readable. Sarah Holbrook, 1847-1863, 16 years old. "There's dozens of these up here," Cole said, sweeping his light around. He was right. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out more stones scattered through the trees. Some were proper monuments. Others were just stacked rocks or rotting wooden crosses. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. Crying. A woman sobbing softly somewhere in the darkness ahead of us. "Did you hear that?" I grabbed Cole's arm. "Hear what?" "Someone's crying." Cole went still, listening. For a long moment there was nothing. Then it came again, clearer this time. Desperate, grief-stricken weeping echoing through the trees. "Hello?" Cole called out. His voice cracked. "Is someone out there?" The crying stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. "We should go back," I said. But Cole was already moving toward where the sound had come from, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I didn't want to follow. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run back down that mountain, but I couldn't leave him alone up there. The graves grew denser as we pushed deeper into the ridge. We were in the heart of it now, surrounded by dozens of burial sites. Many of the stones had fallen over. Some were split in half. A few graves looked disturbed. The earth sunken in or pushed up, as if something had tried to claw its way out from below. I tried not to think about that. "Cole, seriously, we need to leave." He didn't respond. His light had fixed on something ahead, a larger monument, maybe 4 feet tall, standing in a small clearing. As we got closer, I could see it was a family plot. The Caudle family, 8 graves, all from the 1860s. 5 of them were children. "Jesus," Cole breathed. "They all died the same year. Must have been disease or something." That's when his flashlight went out. Just died, like the batteries had been ripped out. Mine flickered once, twice, then followed. We were plunged into absolute darkness. The kind of dark you only find in the deep woods, where the canopy is so thick not even starlight gets through. "Cole?" My voice sounded small and pathetic. "I'm right here, man. Just hold on." I could hear him fumbling with his flashlight, shaking it, trying to get it to work. I did the same with mine, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. Then we heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps, walking slowly through the leaves, circling around us in the darkness. I couldn't tell how far away they were. The acoustics in those dense woods played tricks on your ears. "Who's there?" Cole's voice was shrill with panic now. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds, nothing. Then, from somewhere to my left, I heard breathing. Slow, raspy breathing, like someone with damaged lungs struggling for air. My flashlight suddenly flickered back to life. I swung it toward the sound. There was nothing there. Just trees and graves and shadows. "Ethan." Cole's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at the monument." I turned my light back to the Caudle family plot. Something was wrong with it. The dates had changed. Where before it had read 1860s, now every stone showed the same date of death. Today's date. That's not possible, I stammered. We saw. It was different. We need to run. Right now. We ran. I don't remember the path we took. I don't remember half of what happened in those next few minutes. I remember branches tearing at my face and my lungs burning, and the absolute certainty that something was chasing us through those trees. I could hear it behind us. Footsteps crashing through the underbrush, faster than anything human should be able to move. Cole was ahead of me, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. He stumbled over a fallen log and went down hard. I grabbed his arm, hauling him back to his feet, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing between the trees about 30 feet behind us. It looked like a woman in an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in Civil War photographs. But there was something deeply wrong about her proportions. Her arms hung too long, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, and her face... God, her face was all wrong. Like someone had tried to recreate a human face from memory and gotten the details just slightly off. She didn't move, just stood there, watching us with eyes that reflected our flashlight beams like an animal's. We ran harder. I don't know how long it took us to find the logging road. It felt like hours. When we finally burst out of the tree line and saw Cole's truck sitting there in the moonlight, I almost cried with relief. Cole fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice before getting the door open. We threw ourselves inside and he gunned the engine, spraying gravel as we fishtailed back onto the main road. Neither of us spoke for the first 5 minutes. We just drove, putting as much distance between us and that ridge as possible. "What the hell was that?" Cole finally asked. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I don't know." "Did you see her face? Did you see?" "I saw." We drove in silence after that. When Cole dropped me off at my house around 3 in the morning, he made me promise not to tell anyone what happened, made me swear it. Like saying it out loud would somehow make it more real. I promised. But that wasn't the end of it. That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started noticing things. Small things at first. My reflection in the mirror looking slightly off, like the angle was wrong. The feeling of being watched, even in my own room. Sounds in the night. Soft footsteps in the hallway when everyone else was asleep. Then the dreams started. Every night, the same dream. I'm back on Graveyard Ridge, standing in that clearing with the Caudle family plot. But now I can read all the names clearly. Sarah Caudle, age 6. Marcus Caudle, age 4. Emma Caudle, age 8. And there, at the end of the row, a fresh grave with a new stone. My name is on it. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, and for just a second I'd see her, that woman from the woods, standing at the foot of my bed. Then she'd be gone, leaving only the lingering smell of damp earth and decay. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, just my imagination playing tricks after a scary experience. But then Cole called me. His voice was barely recognizable. Hollow, lifeless. "Ethan, I've been seeing her. Every night. She stands outside my window and just watches. I can't sleep. I can't eat. My parents think I'm losing my mind. Cole, we should tell someone. Maybe there's..." I went back. My blood ran cold. "What?" "Last night. I had to know if it was real, if we really saw what we thought we saw." "Cole, what happened?" The line was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, "The graves are different now. There are 2 new ones. Fresh dirt. No markers yet. Cole, the dates, Ethan. The dates on those new graves. It's next week. Thursday." He hung up. I tried calling him back a dozen times. No answer. I drove to his house, but his truck was gone and his parents said he'd left before dawn, wouldn't tell them where he was going. That was 3 days ago. Cole hasn't answered his phone. His parents filed a missing person report this morning. The police are organizing a search party to check the areas he usually visited. I know where he went. I know exactly where he went. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that's slowly driving me insane. I want to go back too. Some part of me, some sick, twisted part that doesn't feel entirely like me anymore, wants to return to Graveyard Ridge, to find those fresh graves Cole told me about, to see my name carved in stone. The compulsion gets stronger every day. Every night I dream about that clearing, and every morning I wake up a little further from my bedroom than I was the night before. Last night I woke up standing in my driveway. Tonight I'll probably wake up on the road leading into the mountains. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened, what's still happening. If you're reading this, it means I finally gave in to the pull. It means I went back to Graveyard Ridge. Maybe I'll find Cole up there. Maybe I'll find answers. Or maybe I'll just find what's been waiting for me all along. A fresh grave with my name on it, dated for tomorrow. The old folks were right. You should never go near Graveyard Ridge after dark. But once it calls to you, once you hear your name whispered through those trees, you don't really have a choice anymore. I can hear it now, even as I write this. A woman's voice, soft and sad, calling from somewhere up in the mountains. It's almost midnight. Time to go. The old cemetery sat on a ridge so remote, even the locals avoided it after dark. I should have listened to them. My name is Sarah, and I used to think graveyards were just places where the dead rested peacefully. That belief died the night I spent on Graveyard Ridge in the Appalachian Mountains. What I experienced there changed everything I thought I knew about death and about what might linger in places where the veil between worlds grows thin. It started 3 months ago when my grandfather passed away. He was 92, lived his whole life in eastern Kentucky, and took most of his stories to the grave with him. But before he died, he kept repeating something that made no sense to me at the time. "Stay away from the Ridge Cemetery," he'd whisper, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "The dead there don't rest right. They remember." I dismissed it as the ramblings of a dying man. I wish I hadn't. After the funeral, I inherited his old cabin near the town of Harlan. I'm a photographer, and the idea of spending a few weeks in the mountains to clear my head and maybe capture some atmospheric shots seemed perfect. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and according to the deed, it sat just 2 miles from an abandoned cemetery on what locals called Graveyard Ridge. The first week passed uneventfully. I hiked during the day, edited photos at night, and enjoyed the silence that only deep wilderness can provide. But I kept thinking about that cemetery. Not because of my grandfather's warning, but because of something the mail carrier mentioned when he dropped off a package. "You're staying in the old Coleman place?" he asked, eyeing me with concern. "That means you're near the Ridge Cemetery. Folks don't go up there anymore." "Why not?" I asked. He shifted uncomfortably. "Strange things happen. Animals won't go near it. And there's sounds at night that..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Just stay away after sunset. That's all I'll say." Of course, that only made me more curious. I'm not proud of what happened next, but that curiosity led me to make the worst decision of my life. On a Friday evening, I packed my camera, a flashlight, and headed up the old trail toward Graveyard Ridge. The path was overgrown, barely visible through the underbrush, which told me it hadn't been used in years. As I climbed higher, the forest around me grew darker, the canopy so thick it blocked out most of the fading sunlight. When I finally reached the cemetery, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't large, maybe 30 or 40 graves scattered across a small clearing. Most of the headstones were ancient, weathered to the point where the names were barely readable. The dates I could make out ranged from the 1800s to the early 1900s. Moss covered everything, and the whole place had an oppressive feeling, like the air itself was heavier there. I started taking photos as the sun dipped below the horizon. The golden hour light filtering through the trees created an eerie, beautiful effect. I was so focused on my shots that I didn't notice how quickly darkness fell. One moment there was light. The next moment I was standing in near complete darkness with only my flashlight cutting through the gloom. That's when I heard the first sound, a low scraping noise like metal dragging against stone. I spun around, pointing my flashlight toward the source. Nothing, just rows of silent graves and the dark forest beyond. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and foolish in the darkness. The scraping stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I could feel my heart pounding as I slowly backed toward the trail. But then I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the cemetery. I wasn't alone. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. My flashlight beam swept across the headstones, searching for the source of the sound. That's when I saw her. A woman stood about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a large oak tree. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, the kind you'd see in photographs from the 1920s. Her hair was long and dark, and she was staring directly at me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone. I was just taking photos and—" She took a step toward me, and I noticed something wrong. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like a film with missing frames. One moment she was by the tree, the next she was several feet closer, though I never saw her actually walk. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get away from that place. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I stumbled down the trail. Behind me, I could hear her following. Not running, but moving impossibly fast with those same jerky, unnatural movements. And she wasn't alone anymore. There were other sounds now, multiple footsteps, whispers in the darkness, and that horrible scraping noise, louder and closer. I don't know how I made it back to the cabin. Terror gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, and locked every window and door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I tried to call for help. No signal. Of course, there was no signal. I spent that night huddled in the living room with every light in the cabin burning. Around midnight, the sound started. Scratching at the windows, footsteps on the porch, and voices, so many voices, whispering just loud enough that I could almost make out the words. "Come back. You saw us. You have to come back. Come back." I covered my ears and tried to convince myself it was just the wind, just animals, just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had followed me from that cemetery, and it wanted me to return. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, the sounds stopped abruptly. Exhausted and terrified, I finally allowed myself to close my eyes for a few minutes. I woke up several hours later to find muddy footprints leading from my front door to the bedroom where I'd fallen asleep. Bare footprints. Human-shaped, but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, and they stopped right beside where I'd been lying. I should have left right then. I should have driven back to civilization and never looked back. But I needed answers. I needed to understand what I'd encountered on that ridge. So I did what any foolish person would do. I went to the local library and started researching. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, watched me with knowing eyes as I pulled old newspaper articles and historical records. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her about the Ridge Cemetery, she sighed heavily. "You went up there, didn't you?" she said. It wasn't really a question. I nodded. "Then you've been marked," she said quietly. "Everyone who goes to that cemetery after dark gets marked. Most folks know better than to go at all." "Marked? What does that mean?" She gestured for me to follow her to a back room filled with older archives. She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to Pastor William Hutchins. He served the community here from 1887 to 1923. Read this entry. The date was October 15th, 1889. The handwriting was difficult to decipher, but the content was clear enough. Pastor Hutchins wrote about a group of settlers who had been buried on the ridge after a mysterious illness swept through their camp. But according to his account, they hadn't died from any normal disease. They'd been cursed by something they'd disturbed while clearing the land, an ancient burial ground that predated European settlement by centuries. The pastor wrote that the dead on the ridge were restless and hungry, and that anyone who visited after sunset would be haunted until they either returned to the cemetery or died. Several people had disappeared over the years, all of them last seen heading toward the ridge. "That's insane," I whispered, but my hands were trembling as I read. "Is it?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Then explain the sounds you heard last night. Explain the woman you saw." I couldn't. I had no rational explanation for what I'd experienced. "What do I do?" I asked desperately. "You have two choices," she said. "You can leave and never come back to these mountains. Sometimes that works. The connection fades with distance. Or you can return to the cemetery and give them what they want. Which is?" She closed the journal and looked at me with sad eyes. "They want to be remembered. They want their stories told. Every grave up there represents someone who was forgotten, whose name was lost to time. Talk to them, acknowledge them. Maybe then they'll let you go." I spent the rest of the day trying to decide what to do. The rational part of my brain said to get in my car and drive as far away as possible. But another part, the part that had experienced genuine supernatural terror, believed Mrs. Patterson. And there was something else too, a strange pull, like an invisible thread connecting me to that place on the ridge. As sunset approached, I made my decision. I gathered a notebook, my flashlight, and my grandfather's old Bible. If I was going to face whatever waited on that ridge, I wanted some protection, even if it was just symbolic. The hike up the trail felt different this time. The forest seemed to be watching me, waiting to see what I would do. When I reached the cemetery, full darkness had already fallen. The graves looked even more sinister in the flashlight beam, shadows dancing across the weathered stones. "I'm here," I called out, my voice shaking. I came back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, they appeared. Not just the woman I'd seen before, but dozens of figures materializing between the headstones. Men, women, even children, all dressed in clothing from different eras. They stood perfectly still, watching me with those same reflective eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, addressing all of them. "I'm sorry you were forgotten. I want to hear your stories. I want to remember you." The woman stepped forward. Up close, I could see that her face was gray, lifeless, but her eyes held an intensity that was almost painful to witness. "Read," she whispered, her voice like wind through dry leaves. "Read our names." I understood then. I moved to the nearest headstone and began reading aloud every name I could decipher. Margaret Hollis, beloved wife and mother, 1854-1889. I moved to the next one. Samuel Brooks, taken too soon, 1862-1887. For hours I walked through that cemetery, reading every inscription, acknowledging every person buried there. As I spoke each name, the figure associated with that grave would fade slightly, becoming more transparent. It was as if my recognition of their existence gave them permission to finally rest. When I reached the last grave, a small marker for a child named Emma who had died at age 7, I felt tears streaming down my face. These weren't monsters. They were just people who had been lost and forgotten, trapped in a place between death and true rest. Emma Carter, cherished daughter, 1881-1888, I read, my voice breaking. May you finally find peace. The little girl who had been standing nearby smiled at me, a sad, grateful smile, and then she was gone. They were all gone. The cemetery was empty except for me and the silent graves. I thought it was over. I thought I'd fulfilled whatever obligation had been placed upon me. But as I turned to leave, I saw one more headstone I'd somehow missed. It was newer than the others, the stone still relatively clear, and the name carved into it made my blood run cold. Sarah Coleman. My name. The date of birth matched mine exactly. But the death date was today's date. I'm writing this from my grandfather's cabin. It's been 3 hours since I left the cemetery, and I can't shake the feeling that something followed me back. Not the spirits from the graves. They're at peace now. This is something else. Something that was waiting in that cemetery for someone foolish enough to read their own name on a headstone. The scratching at the windows has started again, but this time it sounds different, more insistent, more hungry. And I keep hearing my grandfather's voice in my head, those final words he spoke before he died. The dead there don't rest right. They remember. I understand now what he meant. The cemetery doesn't just house the forgotten dead. It claims new ones. It always has. And I played right into its trap. The door handle is turning, even though I know I locked it. My flashlight is starting to flicker, and in the darkness beyond my window, I can see a figure standing there. It's wearing my face. I never believed in curses. Not until I spent 3 nights on Graveyard Ridge in the heart of Appalachia. What happened up there changed me in ways I still don't fully understand. Some nights, I wake up convinced I'm still there, still hearing those sounds echoing through the hollows. Let me take you back to September of last year. I'm a folklore researcher. I know that sounds pretentious, but it's what I do. I travel to remote places, collect stories, document dying traditions. When I heard about Graveyard Ridge from a local historian in Asheville, something about the way she lowered her voice made my skin prickle. "Don't go up there," she said, her wrinkled hands gripping her coffee mug so tight her knuckles went white. "Especially not after dark. Those stories, they ain't just stories." Of course, that only made me want to go more. Graveyard Ridge sits about 40 miles outside any proper town, accessible only by a logging road that hasn't been maintained since the 80s. The ridge got its name from the cemetery that sprawls across its peak, a burial ground that dates back to the early 1700s. Generations of mountain families rest there, their weathered headstones jutting from the earth like broken teeth. I arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. The trees were just starting to turn, splashes of red and gold against the dense green. Beautiful, really. If you didn't know what waited up there, the hike took 3 hours. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun was already sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the pines. The cemetery stretched out before me, at least 2 acres of tilted graves and crumbling monuments. Fog was rolling in from the valley below, thick and cold. I set up my tent at the edge of the burial ground, close enough to observe but not so close that I felt disrespectful. That's what I told myself anyway. Truth is, something about those graves made my stomach turn. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. As darkness fell, I started my audio recorder and notebook, ready to document anything unusual. The locals had told me stories, voices calling from the graves, figures moving between the headstones, a woman in white who walked the same path every night, searching for something she'd never find. Superstition, I thought. Mountain folklore. I was so incredibly wrong. The first hour was quiet. Just wind through the pines and the occasional owl. I made notes, ate a granola bar, checked my equipment. Normal field research stuff. But around 9 o'clock, the temperature dropped. I'm talking a sudden, brutal cold that seemed to seep up from the ground itself. My breath came out in white clouds even though it had been nearly 70 degrees an hour before. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint at first, a woman's voice, high and clear, carrying some melody I didn't recognize. Old-timey, like a hymn from centuries past. I grabbed my flashlight and recorder, my heart already racing. This is what I came for, right? Evidence. Documentation. I followed the sound deeper into the cemetery. The graves here were ancient, many so weathered I couldn't read the names anymore. My flashlight beam cut through the fog, illuminating moss-covered stones and rusted iron fences. The singing grew louder, closer, but I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small in the darkness. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. Complete and absolute, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Even the wind had died. Then I saw her. She stood about 30 yards away, near a large marble monument that had partially collapsed. A woman in a long white dress, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She wasn't moving, just standing there, facing away from me. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound calm and professional. "I'm a researcher. I'm documenting." She turned around. I can't explain what I saw. Her face was wrong. Not decomposed or monstrous like in the movies, just wrong. Her features were there, but they didn't sit right, like someone had tried to remember what a human face looked like and got it slightly off. And her eyes... God, her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, everything. She started walking toward me. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but pure instinct took over. I crashed through the cemetery, my flashlight beam jerking wildly, illuminating graves and monuments in stuttering flashes. Behind me, I could hear her footsteps, steady, unhurried, like she knew I couldn't escape. I made it back to my tent, fumbled with the zipper, threw myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. I sat there in the darkness, breathing hard, listening. Footsteps circled my tent. Slow, deliberate circles, around and around and around. "Please," I whispered, though I don't know what I was asking for. The footsteps stopped right outside the entrance. I could see her silhouette through the thin fabric backlit by moonlight. She stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then, in a voice that sounded like wind through hollow logs, she spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced this was it. This was how I died. Alone on some cursed mountain ridge, another cautionary tale for researchers who didn't listen to warnings. But when I finally worked up the courage to open my eyes again, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against my tent wall, flashlight in one hand, knife in the other, jumping at every sound. The woman in white didn't return, but other things did. Around midnight, I heard children laughing. It came from the far end of the cemetery, where the oldest graves were, high-pitched giggles and the sound of running feet. But when I looked through my tent flap, I saw nothing. Just fog and darkness and those crooked headstones. The laughter continued for hours, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always playful, always wrong. By dawn, I was exhausted and terrified, but still alive. As the sun rose and burned away the fog, the cemetery looked almost peaceful. Normal. I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, isolation, suggestion, my mind playing tricks. I should have left then, packed up and hiked back to civilization. But I'm stubborn, or stupid, probably both. I spent the day exploring the cemetery, photographing graves, taking notes. Many of the headstones told tragic stories. Entire families wiped out by disease. Children who died before their first birthday. Women who died in childbirth. The mountain had not been kind to the people buried here. One grave caught my attention. A small monument, partially hidden by overgrown brush. The inscription was barely legible, but I managed to make out a name. Sarah Blackwood, 1789 to 1807. Below it, worn almost smooth by time and weather, were the words, "Buried, but not at rest." Something about that phrase made my blood run cold. As I cleared away the brush for a better photo, my hand touched something cold and metallic. A rusted chain, half buried in the soil. I pulled it free and found a locket attached to it. Inside was a lock of black hair and a tiny, faded portrait of a young woman. Beautiful, sad eyes. I slipped the locket into my pocket, planning to document it later. Stupid, so incredibly stupid. That second night was worse. The woman in white appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. As darkness fell and that unnatural cold settled over the ridge, I saw them emerging from the fog. Dozens of figures, pale and silent, drifting between the graves. Men, women, children, all of them wrong in that same indefinable way, all of them moving toward my tent. I grabbed my gear and ran for the tree line. I could hear them following, their footsteps rustling through dead leaves. The children were laughing again, that horrible, playful sound that made my skin crawl. I hid behind an old oak tree, trying to control my breathing, trying to think. The locket in my pocket felt suddenly heavy, wrong. I pulled it out and the metal was ice cold, so cold it burned my fingers. That's when I understood. I had taken something from this place, disturbed something that should have stayed buried. The figures surrounded the tree, forming a perfect circle. In the moonlight filtering through the branches, I could see their faces more clearly now. Hollow, hungry. The woman in white stood directly in front of me, her black eyes fixed on mine. "Give it back," she said. That same hollow voice. "Give back what you took." My hands trembling, I held out the locket. She didn't take it. Instead, she pointed toward the cemetery, toward Sarah Blackwood's grave. I ran again, this time with purpose. The spectral figures followed but didn't try to stop me. I found the small monument in the darkness, my flashlight beam shaking. I knelt and placed the locket on the grave, pressing it into the soft earth. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." The temperature shifted. The oppressive cold lifted slightly. When I looked up, the figures were gone. All of them. The cemetery was empty and silent. I didn't wait to see if they'd come back. I packed my tent in record time, barely caring about my equipment. By the light of my headlamp, I started the hike down the mountain. It was dangerous, hiking that trail in darkness, but staying felt infinitely more dangerous. I made it to my car as the sun was rising, exhausted, terrified, but alive. That was 10 months ago. I haven't been back to Graveyard Ridge. I haven't been back to Appalachia at all. Some might call that cowardice. I call it survival. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. The thing I can't explain or rationalize away. Last week I was going through the photos from that trip, the ones I managed to take before everything went to hell. In one photo, taken during the day from the edge of the cemetery, there's a figure in the background. Far away, barely visible among the headstones, a woman in white. She's facing the camera, even in the daylight. Even in a photo taken hours before I saw her that first night, she was already watching me. And in my pocket right now, I can feel something cold and metallic. I've checked 100 times. My pockets are empty, but I can still feel it. The weight of that locket, the weight of taking something from the dead. Sometimes late at night I hear singing, that same old hymn, and I know with absolute certainty that Graveyard Ridge isn't finished with me yet. Some places don't let you leave, not really. You might walk away, you might put hundreds of miles between you and those cursed grounds, but part of you stays there. Part of you is always there, and part of them follows you home. The wind cut through the trees like 1,000 whispers that night, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. I was standing at the edge of an old graveyard in the Appalachian Mountains, somewhere deep in eastern Kentucky, and I already knew I'd made a terrible mistake. My name's Marcus, and I'm what you'd call an amateur paranormal investigator. I know, sounds ridiculous now. But 3 months ago, I was convinced I could document real supernatural activity. I had all the gear, night vision cameras, EMF readers, voice recorders. I thought I was prepared for anything. I wasn't prepared for Graveyard Ridge. The locals in the nearby town of Harlan had warned me not to go up there. An old woman at the gas station actually grabbed my arm when I mentioned it, her fingers digging into my skin like claws. "That place ain't for the living," she hissed, her eyes wide with genuine fear. "People who go up there, they don't come back the same." I should have listened. The graveyard sat on a ridge about 2 miles up a winding mountain road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. My truck barely made it, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers trying to pull me back. When I finally reached the clearing, the sun was already setting, painting everything in shades of blood orange and deep purple. The cemetery itself was ancient. Most of the headstones were so weathered you couldn't read the names anymore, just vague indentations where letters used to be. Some graves had sunken in completely, leaving dark depressions in the ground that looked like open mouths. The oldest marker I could make out was from 1847. I set up my equipment as darkness fell, mounting cameras on nearby trees and placing my voice recorder on top of a particularly large tombstone in the center. The stone was different from the others, black as coal and perfectly preserved, with a name I could still read clearly. Eliza Morrow, 1823-1847, may she rest in peace. But it was the inscription below that made my skin crawl. What sleeps beneath should never wake. I laughed it off nervously, my breath forming clouds in the cold October air. Just local superstition, I told myself. But as I turned on my equipment, I noticed something strange. My EMF reader was going crazy, the needle jumping erratically, even though there were no power lines anywhere near this place. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind. A woman's voice, high and clear, singing what sounded like an old hymn. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just rows of crooked headstones casting twisted shadows in every direction. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped immediately, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the entire forest was holding its breath. Even the wind had died down. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, each thud louder than the last. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming from somewhere deeper in the graveyard, a slow, deliberate crunching of dead leaves. I aimed my flashlight in that direction and nearly dropped it. There was a figure standing between two graves about 30 feet away, perfectly still, watching me. It was a woman in a long, tattered dress that might have been white once but was now the color of old bones. Her hair hung down past her shoulders in matted tangles, and her face... God, her face was wrong. Too pale, too gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though every instinct was screaming at me to run. She didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head to the side at an impossible angle, like her neck was broken. Then she smiled, and I saw that her teeth were filed down to points. That's when I ran. I crashed through the graveyard, knocking over my equipment, my feet catching on hidden roots and sunken graves. Behind me, I could hear her following. Not running, just walking with that same steady pace, but somehow keeping up no matter how fast I moved. I made it to my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. When I finally got the engine started and looked in my rearview mirror, she was standing right behind the vehicle, her face pressed against the back window. I slammed on the gas and the truck lurched forward, fishtailing on the loose gravel. I didn't slow down until I reached the main road, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I finally worked up the courage to check the mirror again, the road behind me was empty. I told myself it was just someone playing a prank, some local trying to scare off the paranormal investigator. But deep down, I knew better. The way she moved, the way her neck bent, the way she kept pace with me without running. That wasn't human. I should have gone straight home. I should have counted my losses and never looked back. But I'd left all my equipment up there. Expensive cameras and recorders I couldn't afford to replace. Against every shred of common sense, I decided to go back the next morning to retrieve it. The graveyard looked different in daylight, less menacing but somehow more sad. The weathered headstones seemed to lean toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. I found my cameras and recorder exactly where I'd left them, though one camera had been moved to face Eliza Morrow's grave directly. My hands trembled as I checked the footage. The night vision showed me setting up, walking around, all normal stuff. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., the image flickered and something appeared next to Eliza's headstone. It was the woman from last night, but the camera revealed details my terrified mind had missed. Her dress wasn't just tattered, it was a burial shroud. Her skin wasn't pale, it was gray and waxy, like a corpse. And those eyes, they were completely black. No whites at all, just empty voids staring directly at the camera. But the audio was worse. When I played back the voice recorder, I heard myself calling out, "Hello?" just like I remembered. But underneath my voice, barely audible, there were others. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all whispering at once. I couldn't make out individual words, just a horrible susurrus of overlapping voices that made my teeth ache. Then came the singing again, that same hymn, but this time I could make out the words. Down in the valley so low, hang your head over, hear the wind blow. Hear the wind blow, dear, hear the wind blow. Hang your head over, hear the wind blow. It was an old folk song, one I vaguely remembered from childhood. But there was something wrong with how she sang it. The melody was distorted, wrong somehow. like it was being sung backwards or underwater, and then she spoke. "Marcus," the recording said in a voice like grinding stones, "you disturbed my rest. Now you'll never rest again." The voice recorder shut off abruptly and I nearly threw it across the clearing. How did she know my name? I hadn't introduced myself. I hadn't even mentioned my name out loud. I grabbed my equipment and practically ran back to my truck. As I was loading everything into the bed, I noticed something carved into the driver's side door. Fresh scratches in the paint, gouged deep into the metal. "Come back when the moon is dark." I didn't remember seeing those marks before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone as I took pictures of the scratches. Then I got in the truck and drove away, watching the graveyard disappear in my rearview mirror. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, I've been having the dreams. Every night, the same one. I'm back in that graveyard, standing in front of Eliza Morrow's headstone. The ground starts to crack and shift, and pale, dirt-covered hands emerge from beneath the earth. They grab my ankles and pull, dragging me down into the cold darkness below. I always wake up gasping, covered in sweat, with the taste of grave dirt in my mouth. But the dreams aren't the worst part. Last week, I found mud tracked through my apartment. Thick red Appalachian clay, the kind that clings to everything. It led from my front door to my bedroom and stopped right at the foot of my bed. I live on the 3rd floor. There's no way someone could have gotten in. I scrubbed the floors until my hands bled, but the next morning, the tracks were back. 3 days ago, I woke up to find my window open, even though I'd locked it before bed. Something was written in the condensation on the glass. "Moon's getting darker." I checked the lunar calendar. New moon is in 2 days. Yesterday, I started seeing her during the day. Just glimpses at first, a figure in the corner of my eye that vanishes when I turn to look. But they're getting longer, more solid. This morning, I saw her standing at the end of my street, that same tattered burial shroud flapping in a wind I couldn't feel. She was smiling, showing those filed teeth, and she was pointing at me. I've tried everything. I went to a priest, but when I showed him the videos, he refused to help, said some things are beyond the church's power. I contacted paranormal investigators, real ones, but they all gave me the same advice. Stay away from Graveyard Ridge. Don't go back no matter what. But I don't think I have a choice anymore. Last night, I fell asleep at my desk and dreamed I was standing in front of Eliza's grave again. But this time, she was standing right next to me, her cold hand gripping my shoulder. "You opened the door when you called out to the darkness," she whispered directly into my ear, her breath smelling like damp earth and decay. "Now you have to close it. Come back when the moon is dark, or I'll come for you where you are. And when I do, I won't be alone." When I woke up, there was a handprint on my shoulder, a perfect impression in red clay, the fingers too long and thin to be human. I scrubbed it off in the shower, but I can still feel where she touched me, like an icy brand burned into my skin. So I'm going back tonight. The new moon rises at midnight, and I don't know what I'm going to find up there. Maybe there's a way to close whatever door I opened. Maybe there's a way to put Eliza Morrow back to rest. Or maybe I'm just driving up to that ridge to disappear like all the others the locals whispered about. I'm recording this now, typing it all out, because I need someone to know what happened. If you're reading this, if I never come back, stay away from Graveyard Ridge. Stay away from any old cemetery in the Appalachian Mountains where the headstones are worn smooth, and the locals warn you not to go. Because some places are graveyards for a reason. Some places are meant to keep things buried. And when you disturb what sleeps beneath, when you call out into the darkness and something answers, you can never take it back. It's 10 p.m. now. I'm loading up my truck with iron chains and salt. Old remedies I found in my research. Probably useless, but I have to try something. My hands won't stop shaking, and I keep seeing movement in the shadows of my apartment. The drive up the mountain will take about an hour. By the time I reach Graveyard Ridge, the new moon will be high in the sky. Or rather, it won't be visible at all, just an absence of light where the moon should be. I can hear singing again, faint, but getting louder. That same hymn, but now I can hear other voices joining in, a whole chorus of the dead calling me back to finish what I started. Down in the valley so low. I have to go now. The singing is getting louder, and I can smell damp earth even though all my windows are closed. If anyone finds this, remember what I said. Stay away from Graveyard Ridge, and if you ever find yourself in an old Appalachian cemetery after dark, if you hear singing or footsteps or voices in the wind, don't call out, don't answer back, just run. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, deep in the hollers where the mountains swallow the sun by 4 in the afternoon. My family's been buried in the same graveyard for 6 generations. It sits on a ridge so remote you can't see it from any road. The locals call it Whisper Ridge, though I never knew why until the summer I turned 19. That June, my grandmother passed. She was the last of the old-timers who remembered the stories, the real stories that people don't tell anymore. At her funeral, my uncle pulled me aside and said I needed to tend her grave every week through summer. It was tradition, he said. The oldest grandchild always does it. I didn't argue. I loved my grandmother. But I should have asked why his hands were shaking when he handed me the key to the cemetery gate. The graveyard sits at the end of a logging road that hasn't been maintained since the 80s. You have to hike the last mile through dense woods where the trees grow so thick their branches tangle overhead like fingers locking together. The first time I went alone, I felt it immediately. That sensation of being watched, not by animals, something that knew I was there. The cemetery itself is small, maybe 40 headstones scattered across an acre of overgrown grass. There's a split rail fence around it, rotting and useless. My grandmother's grave was fresh, the dirt still dark and mounded. I brought flowers and a small brush to clean her headstone. I was kneeling there, pulling weeds, when I noticed the other grave. It was maybe 10 feet away, tucked against the tree line. The stone was old, so weathered I could barely read the name. What I could make out sent ice through my veins. Sarah Cunningham, born 1847, died 1847. She'd lived less than a year. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was the date of death, November 9th. And carved below it, almost invisible from erosion, were words that made my skin crawl. She waits. I stood up fast, suddenly desperate to leave. The sun was getting low, painting the ridge in deep orange light that made the shadows between the trees look solid. As I turned to go, I heard it, whispering. Soft, like wind through leaves. But there was no wind. The air was completely still, heavy and humid. I froze, straining to hear. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere, a dozen voices overlapping, too quiet to understand, but unmistakably human. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I crashed through those woods like something was chasing me, branches whipping my face, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I should have never gone back, but I did. Because 2 days later, I started dreaming about Sarah. In the dreams, I was standing at her grave in the dark. The moon was full, bright enough to read the headstone clearly, and every time I would hear her crying, a baby's cry, desperate and hungry and wrong somehow. In the dream, I would look down, and the grave would be open, just a black hole in the ground, and the crying would get louder. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. After the 3rd night, I called my uncle. "Tell me about Sarah Cunningham," I said. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he spoke. "Where did you hear that name?" I told him about the grave, about the dreams. He was quiet again, then said words I'll never forget. "Don't go back to that ridge. Not alone, not at night, not ever. Some things that get buried don't stay dead." He wouldn't explain. Just told me to break tradition, to let someone else tend grandmother's grave. But I couldn't. It felt like betraying her, so I made a plan. I'd go during the day, do my work quickly, and ignore everything else. The next Saturday, I drove up at noon. The sun was high and bright. I felt safer. Stupid, I know, but daylight makes you believe in logic again. My grandmother's grave looked different. The flowers I'd left were scattered, torn apart like something had dug through them. And there were marks in the dirt, Small handprints, child-sized, leading from Sarah's grave to my grandmother's. My mouth went dry. I knelt down, touching one of the prints. The dirt was cold, impossibly cold, like it had been frozen. In June, in Kentucky, that's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, standing at the edge of the tree line. She wore a filthy white dress that might have been a nightgown once. Her hair was long and tangled, covering most of her face. She wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking. "Are you okay? Are you lost?" She tilted her head, slowly, like her neck was stiff, and then she smiled. I've seen some disturbing things in my life, but nothing like that smile. Too wide, too many teeth, and her eyes. Even from 30 feet away, I could see they were completely black. She took a step toward me, then another, moving in this jerky, unnatural way, like someone learning to walk for the first time. I scrambled backward, tripping over a headstone. Pain shot through my ankle, but I barely felt it. All I could focus on was her getting closer. "Stay back," I choked out. "I'm warning you." She stopped, her head tilted the other way, and then she spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding gravel. "You tend the graves. You wake us up. We've been waiting so long." "I don't understand," I said, tears streaming down my face. "What do you want?" "To be remembered," she whispered. "Say my name." I couldn't speak. My throat was locked. She took another step, and I could smell her now. Earth and decay and something sickeningly sweet, like flowers left too long in a closed room. "Say it," she hissed, her voice rising. "Say my name." "Sarah," I gasped. "Sarah Cunningham." The change was instant. She stopped moving. Her smile faded. For just a moment, she looked like a normal little girl, sad and lost and confused. A tear rolled down her dirty cheek. "Thank you," she said in a small, broken voice. Then she turned and walked back into the trees. I watched her go, my whole body shaking. She moved normally now, like a real child. At the tree line, she looked back once. This time, her eyes were blue. Then she was gone. I sat there for an hour, unable to move. Finally, I got up and ran again. I told myself I'd imagined it. Heat stroke, dehydration, anything but the truth. But when I got home, my boots were caked in that freezing cold dirt. And on my arm, where she'd gotten close, there were 3 small fingerprint bruises, ice cold to the touch. I didn't go back for 2 weeks. My uncle called, asking if I was keeping up with grandmother's grave. I lied and said yes. The dreams got worse. Not just Sarah now. Other children, dozens of them, standing around my bed, whispering my name over and over. Eventually, guilt drove me back. It was late afternoon when I arrived, sun already sinking. I should have waited, but I just wanted it done. I'd clean the grave and leave, fast. But when I got there, the cemetery had changed. More graves were visible now, dozens I'd never seen before, pushing up through the grass like they'd grown overnight. All of them small, all of them children. The dates ranged from the 1840s to the 1920s, but every single one had died before their first birthday. And every stone had the same 2 words carved beneath the dates: "She waits." I was reading them, my heart pounding, when I heard footsteps behind me. Multiple footsteps, small feet on dry grass. I turned slowly. They were all there. 20, maybe 30 children, standing in a semicircle around me. Different ages, different decades judging by their rotting clothes, but all with the same black eyes. All with that too wide smile. Sarah stood in front. "You came back," she said. "We knew you would. You're like your grandmother. Kind. The others, they stopped coming. Stopped saying our names. Stopped remembering. But you came back." "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We're lonely," another child said, a boy in overalls. "So lonely. When you say our names, we feel real again. Just for a moment, we remember being alive." "But it's not enough," Sarah continued. "It's never enough. We want to be remembered always. We want someone to stay with us." They started moving closer, tightening the circle. I backed up until I hit a headstone. "I'll come back," I said desperately. Every week, I'll say all your names, I promise. Promises break, Sarah said sadly. People forget, people leave. But if you stay, we'll never be lonely again. And neither will you. They were close now, close enough to touch. Their cold radiated off them like winter air. I could see my breath. One of them reached out a small gray hand toward me. In that moment, I remembered what my grandmother used to say. She'd always insisted on being buried with an iron nail in her pocket. I'd thought it was just an old superstition, a quirk of her mountain upbringing. But now I understood. Iron, the old protection. I yanked the small pocket knife from my belt, my grandfather's knife with an iron handle, worn smooth from a century of use. I held it up like a cross. The children recoiled, hissing. Sarah's face twisted into something horrible, something ancient and hungry. "That won't protect you forever," she snarled, her voice deeper now, wrong. "You'll have to leave eventually, and we'll be waiting. We're always waiting." I ran, again, but this time I didn't stop at my truck. I drove straight down that mountain and I called my uncle from the road. I told him everything, every detail. He listened in silence. When I finished, he said, "I should have told you. That ridge, it's not natural. Something happened there a long time ago, before the Civil War. A sickness came through, killed every child in the holler, 27 children in 3 weeks. They buried them all up there together. The old folks said the ground went sour, said grief that deep poisons a place, makes it hungry." "Why didn't you warn me?" I shouted. "Because it's our burden," he said quietly. "Someone has to tend those graves, has to remember them. If we don't, they come down from the ridge. They come looking. My father saw it happen once in 1962. 3 children showed up in town, standing in the streets, in people's yards, just staring, silent. It took 6 men with iron implements to drive them back up that mountain." "I'm not going back," I said. "I can't." "I know," he replied. "I'll take over. It should have been me anyway." That was 3 years ago. My uncle tends the graves now. He goes every Sunday without fail. I asked him once if he sees the children. He just looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "Every time. But I say their names, all of them. It keeps them calm." Last month he had a heart attack. He's in the hospital now, recovering. The graves have gone untended for 3 weeks. 2 nights ago, I saw Sarah standing in my backyard. She was just standing there under the oak tree, in that filthy white dress, watching my window. When I turned on the porch light, she was gone, but there were small footprints in the dew, leading from the woods to my back door. Last night, there were more children, 5 of them, standing in a line at the edge of my property. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Tonight, I'm writing this down because I need someone to know. My uncle can't go back up that ridge. His heart's too weak, and there's no one else. The tradition dies with him, or someone takes it up. The children are at my window right now. I can hear them whispering. They're saying my name over and over, the sound building like a chorus. Sarah's face is pressed against the glass, her breath fogging it up. She's writing something in the fog. "Come home. I'm going back to Whisper Ridge tomorrow. I'm going to tend those graves. I'm going to say their names, all of them. Because the alternative, letting them come down from that mountain and spread into the world, is something I can't allow. But I'm terrified that this time, when Sarah asks me to stay, I won't have the strength to say no. I'm afraid that one morning someone will hike up to that lonely cemetery and find a fresh grave, my name on the stone, and carved beneath the dates, those 2 terrible words." He waits.